Most people think it's impossible to escape North Korea, but this woman proved it is possible, not escaping once, but twice, after two miraculous escapes that completely outsmarted the North Korean government. Last year, I made a video on how to escape North Korea in the year 2024, but multiple developments have taken place this year that has led to new stories of how North Koreans are finding new ways to escape the country that have never been attempted before. Today in 2025, North Korean leaders have made it almost impossible to escape the country. A couple thousand North Koreans typically escaped each year, but in recent years, this number has dropped to roughly just 100 each year. With border crossings historically being nearly impossible, this has led North Koreans to have to come up with extremely dangerous and creative ways of making it out of the country, and a young 19-year-old girl named Ji-yoon Park certainly wasn't an exception. At a young age, Ji-yoon remembered her uncle dying in front of her from starvation. Because of this, Ji-yoon started questioning why the North Korean people respected their government's leaders so strongly when the citizens barely had any food to live. She would never question this out loud, neither would her father, but deep down they knew this wasn't right. Ji-yoon and her father had talked about escaping North Korea together, but it wasn't long before her father's health grew dramatically worse.
Wow. Right off the bat, this story grabs your attention. It's shocking to think about how North Korea's oppressive control has made escaping nearly impossible in 2025, with the number of escapees dropping to just around 100 each year. The fact that this young woman, Ji-yoon Park, not only managed to escape once but twice is a testament to her resilience and determination. Her story of questioning the system after witnessing her uncle's death from starvation at such a young age adds a deeply emotional layer. And that moment when she and her father silently acknowledged the injustice of their situation but couldn't voice it? That's just heartbreaking. It really highlights the sheer fear and suppression they live under daily. As we delve into her journey, I'm already intrigued by how she outsmarted such a tightly controlled regime. The level of danger and creativity North Koreans must resort to just for a chance at freedom, it's staggering. Ji-yoon's story is shaping up to be both inspiring and harrowing.
Due to starvation. The father's condition eventually became so bad that he told his daughter, "You need to save your younger brother, you need to leave North Korea." Ji-yoon finally came to the realization that her father was correct, so she gathered all the rice she could find and left it for him before saying her final goodbyes. Ji-yoon and her father grew up in Haesong, North Korea, which is right across the border from China, separated by the Yalu River. This is a relatively remote area, surrounded by mountains and forests, and has a significant military presence due to its close proximity to the Chinese border. Ji-yoon, who was 19 at the time, directed her 14-year-old brother to meet her near the Yalu River that night at midnight. The Yalu River was frozen, given it was winter during this first escape attempt. Ji-yoon and her brother tiptoed down to the bank of the river, crouching, in order to avoid being detected by any of the North Korean guards. Once they finally made it to the banks of the river, Ji-yoon finally told her brother to grab her arm, and they went out into a full sprint across the frozen river. North Korea enforces a strict shoot-to-kill policy for people attempting to escape the country, so Ji-yoon knew how high the stakes were at this very moment. In the section of the river they were attempting to cross, it was only roughly 25 meters from one side to the other. Once Ji-yoon and her brother were about halfway across the river, they heard shouting from the North Korean side, telling them,
"Oh my gosh, this is intense." Imagine the emotional weight on Ji-yoon's shoulders when her father, on his deathbed, entrusts her with the responsibility to save her younger brother. That moment when she leaves all the rice she could find for him and says goodbye? Heart-wrenching. Then, the tension ramps up. Haesong, with its remote, heavily guarded terrain, sounds like something straight out of a spy thriller. But this is their reality. The image of these two young siblings, Ji-yoon, just 19, and her brother, only 14, sneaking down to the frozen Yalu River in the dead of night, is both terrifying and courageous. And then, the sprint across the frozen river, just 25 meters but feeling like miles, knowing there's a shoot-to-kill policy. When the shouting and gunfire start, my heart sank. The stakes here are so real. This isn't just a story, it's life or death for them. I can't even imagine the fear and adrenaline they must have felt in that moment. Absolute bravery.
To stop immediately. Then, gunfire broke out. Somehow Ji-yoon and her brother managed to not get hit by any of the bullets and were now running up the bank of the river onto the Chinese side of the border. Once making it onto Chinese land, Ji-yoon and her brother ran up to the first house they saw and immediately started banging on the door. A Chinese farmer answered, immediately letting them inside, and began serving them an extravagant meal compared to what they're used to, including white rice and boiled eggs. This was a massive surprise to Ji-yoon and her brother, as North Koreans are told that China is an extremely poor country. The Chinese farmer then went on to say that by the morning, they wouldn't be safe here considering the gunfire that just rang out. It was assumed that Chinese officials would come searching the area, looking for any North Korean defectors. China has a long-standing agreement with North Korea, where any North Korean defectors they find in their country are immediately sent back to a North Korean prison. This Chinese farmer went on to say that if Ji-yoon does not marry him, then he will contact police and she will be immediately sent back to North Korea. As for Ji-yoon's brother, the Chinese farmer didn't see any point in keeping him around, so he contacted Chinese police and had this young 14-year-old boy shipped back.
This part of the story is heartbreaking and filled with layers of complexity. The initial moment of relief when Ji-yoon and her brother make it to the Chinese side unscathed, only to face new challenges, underscores how their struggle for freedom is far from over. The stark contrast between the extravagant meal they received, white rice and boiled eggs, and their expectations shaped by North Korean propaganda, highlights just how much misinformation they grew up with. But the shift in tone is jarring. The kindness of the Chinese farmer quickly turns into a manipulative power play. His demand for Ji-yoon to marry him, coupled with his decision to turn her brother over to authorities, reflects a harsh reality. Even escape doesn't guarantee safety or dignity. The loss of her brother, someone she risked everything to protect, feels especially cruel. It's a sobering reminder of how these stories don't always have a happy ending, even after surviving seemingly impossible odds. It's an incredibly tragic turn in her journey.
Into North Korea, where Ji-yoon never saw him again. Ji-yoon was then acquired by this Chinese man and lived as a slave on his farm. Ji-yoon worked from 4:30 a.m. until it got dark in the evening and was only given rice and kimchi. Ji-yoon now felt completely defeated as her life was essentially the same as it was in North Korea, except now she had lost all her family. Ji-yoon was thinking about ending it all until one day she found out she was pregnant. 9 months had now gone by, and Ji-hoon could tell she was ready to give birth, but nobody in China was willing to help her. Ji-hoon was all alone, but successfully gave birth to her child after a long, painful day. For the first 5 years of Ji-hoon's son's life, the two moved around China to many different areas. They were trafficked and sold from one Chinese man to the other, always on the move to evade Chinese officials. By this point, Ji-hoon was now working in a Chinese market during the nights. One night, around midnight, Ji-hoon came home to 10 large Chinese officials there waiting for her. These Chinese officials arrested Ji-hoon in front of her 5-year-old child and told her she was in the country illegally and that she was being sent back to North Korea. Ji-hoon's child didn't understand what was going on in the moment and asked his mom, "Mommy, why are you abandoning me? Why are you leaving me?" At this moment, Ji-hoon's life was completely turned upside down, knowing there was nothing she could do in her power to protect her 5-year-old son. Not only did Ji-hoon not have enough time to explain what was going on, but her son was also too young to understand why she was being taken away. Ji-hoon was then shipped back to a North Korean secretive prison camp, but this was only the first half of her story. Ji-hoon knew she had to find a way to escape once again. In these North Korean prisons, intended for North Koreans who got caught trying to escape the country, 50 to 60 North Koreans are all placed together in one room. These prisoners have to sit down against the wall from 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. and aren't allowed to move at all. There's typically no lights in these rooms, and the prisoners all have one bucket to use as their toilet. One day, Ji-hoon found one of her legs was becoming extremely swollen and she began developing a high fever. The leg was starting to swell to the point that it was emitting a terrible odor and the other prisoners were complaining about it. The North Korean prison guards figured Jae-yoon didn't have much time left to live and sent her to a government-run orphanage house where she could spend her last days there. Jae-yoon was in this orphanage house for 3 months, and her leg wasn't getting any better, but it also wasn't getting any worse. Jae-yoon knew that considering she had remained in relatively decent health for this long, there was a risk of her getting sent back to a North Korean prison. Jae-yoon knew that this could be her last chance to escape. The first time Jae-yoon escaped the country, she did it without what is known as a broker. A North Korean broker is someone who targets North Korean women, illegally helps them escape to China, and then sells them to Chinese men to be trafficked. With the current condition of Jae-yoon's leg, this time she decided it would only be possible to escape through a North Korean broker. Jae-yoon knew what it was like to be trafficked in China, but at this point, she was willing to do whatever she could to hopefully one day see her son again. This broker then assembled a group of Jae-yoon, another North Korean woman, and one other older North Korean man who had a family living in China. Jae-yoon didn't tell her broker about her leg and used pants to conceal the injury, knowing this could lead the broker to not accept her business. At midnight, the 4 of them crossed the Tumen River in an area that this broker knew wouldn't be patrolled by any North Korean guards. The 4 made it into China and had to avoid any roads so that they wouldn't be seen. In China, you can be awarded a substantial amount of money if you turn in any North Korean.
This part of Jae-yoon's story is harrowing and deeply unsettling, reflecting the relentless cycle of exploitation, despair, and resilience. The sheer magnitude of what she endured, slavery, trafficking, the loss of her child, and the inhumane conditions of the North Korean prison, shows a level of suffering that's difficult to fully comprehend. Her moment with her son is especially heartbreaking. The confusion and pain of being separated, combined with his innocent question, "Why are you abandoning me?" adds an emotional weight to an already tragic narrative. It's a devastating reminder of how systems of oppression affect not only individuals but entire families, severing bonds in ways that leave lasting scars. Despite everything, Jae-yoon's determination to escape again demonstrates an extraordinary strength of spirit. Even when faced with physical deterioration and the looming threat of further exploitation, she took the risk to trust a broker, knowing full well the dangers it could entail. This story doesn't just highlight the immense challenges defectors face. It also underscores the resilience of the human spirit and the lengths people will go to for freedom and family. Jae-yoon's willingness to fight for the hope of reuniting with her son, despite the horrors she's endured, is both inspiring and deeply moving.
Said to be almost life-changing money. There's even some Chinese citizens who don't work, they just camp out on the border and search for North Koreans to turn into the government. This can be seen as a very lucrative business. The 4 of them walked through the wooded hills on the Chinese side of the border and eventually stumbled upon a taxi on a remote road. The 4 hurried into the taxi, playing it off like they're ordinary Chinese citizens. The only problem was, Jae-yoon was the only one in the taxi who knew the Chinese language out of the 4. The taxi driver seemed suspicious, asking questions as to why only one of them knew Chinese and what exactly all of them were doing together. Jae-yoon had to play it off like the 2 men, one being the North Korean broker, grew up in Koreatown and they never graduated high school, thus never learned the Chinese language. As for the other girl, Jae-yoon played it off like this was Jae-yoon's sister and she was deaf in both ears. Later in the journey, the taxi driver asked more questions regarding why exactly they were in the woods alone at night, and then Jae-yoon made the extremely quick decision to roll up her pants and show the driver her leg. Jae-yoon explained that they were hiking and she got bit in the leg by a snake. When the driver saw this, he immediately slammed on the gas and believed their entire story. The 4 of them finally arrived at the Chinese broker's house, and the North Korean broker was initially very angry, wondering what Jae-yoon was saying to the taxi driver the entire ride. Jae-yoon explained everything, and then the group bursted out into laughter, realizing the lies Jae-yoon told the taxi driver. Jae-yoon thought this impressive move would have softened up the North Korean broker so that she could call her son, but when she asked that night, the North Korean broker immediately denied Jae-yoon's request. The next morning, the other girl who snuck across from the group was already gone, sold to another Chinese man. For some reason, the North Korean broker had a slight change of heart this morning though, and told Ji-yoon she could call her son only once. Ji-yoon quickly grabbed a phone and called her son's grandmother's house. The son was able to get on the phone, and both Ji-yoon and her son couldn't do much other than cry, thankful both were still alive. After an extremely emotional phone call, the North Korean broker decided to change his mind. The North Korean broker told Ji-yoon, "You saved my life last night. If that taxi driver knew we were from North Korea, I would have got sent back to a North Korean prison and never would have seen my two sons again. Thank you for saving my life last night. So this time, I'll save your life. You have to go." Ji-yoon was then able to reunite with her son and go live with him in secrecy in Beijing. While in Beijing, Ji-yoon met a Korean pastor who had connections to the United Nations. This pastor was able to hand off Ji-yoon and her son to the United Nations, and then they were flown to the United Kingdom to finally live free. These escapes across the Yalu River by Ji-yoon took place in 1998 and 2008, a time where it was relatively easier to escape North Korea than it is today. For example, in 2011, 2,706 people escaped North Korea, but in 2012, 1,502 escaped, a 44% decrease in just 1 year. This is largely in part to the fact that Kim Jong-un took over as North Korea's leader in 2012, following the death of his father, Kim Jong-il. Kim Jong-un intensified surveillance and control measures to prevent North Koreans escaping the country, as these defections were seen as a threat to his regime's stability. He wanted to project an image of strength and maintain a tighter control over his population. The next major decrease in defections came in 2020 when the COVID pandemic hit. The North Korean regime completely sealed off its border with China and Russia, the two main escape routes for most North Korean defectors. Border crossings over the Tumen and Yalu rivers became nearly impossible due to the increased number of North Korean patrols along this border. New barriers, fences, and surveillance systems were also added along the border. North Koreans also needed travel permits to travel from one province of North Korea to the other. This made it much more difficult for people living in North Korea to make it to other border towns and provinces, as virtually all North Koreans were trapped within their hometowns. These factors all combined together led to a record low number of North Koreans successfully escaping the country, with only 229 successful North Korean defections in 2020. This was a dramatic 80% drop from its previous year in 2019, where 1,047 North Koreans were able to escape the country. But you may be wondering why more North Koreans don't try and escape through the southern part of the country. In China and Russia, if they catch North Koreans in their country, they immediately send them back to North Korea, while in South Korea under their constitution, you're automatically granted South Korean citizenship. Escaping directly to South Korea has been seen as virtually impossible, where an estimated less than 1% of North Koreans able to escape the country do so through the southern border.
This narrative highlights the harrowing experiences of Ji-yoon's escape from North Korea and her journey through adversity. It emphasizes her resilience, wit, and determination to reunite with her son despite unimaginable hardships. Ji-yoon's ability to think quickly, like fabricating stories to outsmart a suspicious taxi driver, showcases her resourcefulness under immense pressure. The story also sheds light on the broader challenges faced by North Korean defectors. The risks involved in crossing borders, the systemic barriers put in place by regimes like Kim Jong-un's, and the declining escape rates due to increased surveillance underscore the gravity of their plight. It's heart-wrenching to see how escape routes have become almost impossible due to the tightening of borders and the global pandemic. Additionally, the contrast between China's punitive measures and South Korea's welcoming policy highlights the geopolitical complexities for defectors. While South Korea offers citizenship under its constitution, the physical and political barriers make it a nearly unattainable route for most. The story is both compelling and tragic, serving as a stark reminder of the lengths individuals must go to for freedom and family. It underscores the importance of global awareness and support for human rights, as well as the need for diplomatic and humanitarian efforts to address such systemic oppression. What stood out to you most in this part of the story?
Separating North Korea and South Korea is a demilitarized zone that stretches roughly 250 kilometers long and about 4 kilometers wide. The demilitarized zone, or often referred to as the DMZ, is one of the most heavily militarized borders in the world and serves as a buffer zone to reduce the risk of any conflict between the two countries. This zone is mostly undeveloped, consisting of forests, rivers, and hills. Inside the DMZ, there's also many minefields, making it extremely dangerous for someone to walk through. Despite this danger, a select few North Koreans have attempted to escape the country by going directly through the DMZ. In August of 2024, a North Korean soldier whose name wants to remain hidden decided he needed to escape the country. For the purpose of this video, we'll refer to this man as Lee. But before I explain how Lee was able to escape North Korea, I need to tell you about the sponsor of today's video, Delete Me. I've recently been learning about the privacy risks that comes with online brokers selling my personal information across the web. I wanted to try and prevent this, so I tried out Delete Me, which is a hands-free subscription service that will remove your personal information that's being sold online. Data brokers are massive corporations that collect huge amounts of our personal information, like our social security number, birthdays, and even home addresses. With Delete Me, all you have to do is submit your personal profile with info you want them to remove, and then their privacy experts scan the internet to find data brokers with your information. After 7 days, Delete Me will send you a privacy report that breaks down info like how many data brokers had access to your personal info, as well as all the listings Delete Me removed, and other key information regarding keeping your private information actually private. I personally like Delete Me because they'll keep sending me these privacy reports regularly, so I get to know that this service is actively working to protect my digital privacy. If you want to try out Delete Me today, you can get 20% off a Delete Me consumer plan by scanning this QR code or visiting joindeleteme.com/uncovering. That's joindeleteme.com/uncovering. You can also click on the link below in the description. Get started securing your digital privacy today by scanning this QR code, and thank you again Delete Me for sponsoring this video. Lee was a mid-level officer in the North Korean military who had a relatively privileged life, at least compared to many North Koreans. Lee was also one of the guards stationed along the DMZ, which meant the military saw him as one of their most trusted soldiers. On a foggy night in August of 2024, Lee took advantage of this limited visibility to attempt his escape. Some of Lee's military partners, also stationed along the DMZ, appeared to not be standing guard very attentively, given it was late at night. Given the unique circumstances, Lee left his post and set off into a 2-kilometer wide section of the DMZ, armed with just a basic survival kit. Given the dense vegetation and the thorny bushes of the DMZ, Lee had to crawl most of the way. Lee also felt he had a good understanding of where the minefields were located, so he chose a path that would hopefully avoid setting off any of these landmines. Shortly after entering the DMZ, a few North Korean guards noticed Lee was gone, and then thought they spotted him crawling through the dense bushes of the DMZ. Given how foggy it was and late at night, the North Korean guards didn't have a clear sight on Lee, however. Nonetheless, the guards started firing in Lee's direction, shooting approximately a dozen rounds. Thankfully, none of these bullets struck Lee, and he continued crawling faster through the DMZ, knowing that his fellow guards were now onto him. Lee continued crawling for roughly 18 hours until he finally reached the South Korean side of the border. South Korean soldiers had been monitoring Lee's movements and quickly picked up Lee once he had made it onto their land. Lee was physically exhausted, dehydrated, and very wounded from the sharp vegetation he was crawling through. Despite all this, Lee successfully made it into South Korea through the DMZ in 2024, one of the very few North Koreans to ever do it. While escaping to the south is extremely rare, one way more North Koreans have been.
The story of Lee's escape through the DMZ is both riveting and tragic. Shedding light on the extreme lengths individuals are willing to go to escape the oppressive regime in North Korea. The DMZ is not just a geographical boundary, but a symbol of division and tension. And the fact that Lee risked everything to cross this perilous zone speaks to his desperation for freedom. The details of the escape, particularly the foggy night, the crawling through sharp vegetation, and the constant danger from both landmines and gunfire, add to the intensity of the story. Lee's survival instincts, combined with his knowledge of the terrain, made this escape possible. But it also highlights the grim reality that very few have the resources or luck to succeed in such an endeavor. The sponsor segment about Delete.me serves as an abrupt but necessary transition in the narrative. While it could be distracting for some viewers, it is understandable within the context of YouTube's business model, where creators rely on ads to fund their content. Still, the pacing of the sponsorship feels out of place, interrupting the flow of such a gripping story. Overall, Li's story, while relatively unknown, shines a light on the human cost of escaping a brutal regime and the extreme measures that some North Koreans are willing to undertake. It's a poignant reminder of the harsh realities faced by defectors and the small percentage who succeed in reaching safety. The mention of other methods of escape, such as fleeing by sea, leaves the audience with a sense of the broader context of North Korean defection. Do you think more could be done to highlight the emotional and personal journey of individuals like Li? Or do you feel the factual approach serves the purpose of educating viewers more effectively?
Escaping the country in recent years is by sea. To the east of North Korea is the East Sea, or also known as the Sea of Japan, and to the west is the Yellow Sea. North Koreans don't often attempt to escape by sea, as North Korea has many patrol posts along its maritime borders, and the currents can be very strong and cold. But even in 2024, there have been success stories of North Koreans escaping by sea. A North Korean man, whose name is also anonymous, escaped the country along the western maritime border. This is the Han River and separates North and South Korea to the west. This anonymous man, who we'll refer to as Choi, made it through the military gates and fences that cut off North Koreans from being able to access the sea. Satellite imagery even shows the many different North Korean military bases along the coasts of the country. These military bases are especially common along the Han River, given it's not very far from South Korea. Nonetheless, Choi was able to remain undetected by these North Korean military guards and set out in his small wooden boat to cross the Han estuary. To make it across this estuary and onto South Korean land, you only need to travel about 5 kilometers or 3 miles, but the currents here are very strong, making navigation on the estuary difficult without a proper engine. Choi was in a wooden canoe he built, which is pictured here. Choi chose a relatively calm day and made it across to South Korea's Gyeongdong Island fast enough to not be caught by the North Korean military. South Korean military forces apprehended Choi and brought him safely into the country, another successful defection in 2024. Although Choi made it across successfully, another North Korean man who was attempting to cross at the same time as Choi unfortunately went missing. South Korean officials are still investigating this disappearance, trying to figure out what happened to this second North Korean man, but it's likely that the North Korean military was able to capture him before he made it onto Gyeongdong Island. While these successful escape attempts in 2024 are all very isolated incidents, what seems like it'll be the best method for 2025? With Kim Jong-un increasing his military's presence along the entire border every year, North Koreans are going to have to come up with new ways to escape this oppressive regime. Well, in 2025, one of the easiest ways to escape may be signing up to join the North Korean military. Just as of October 2024, it's been reported that North Korean troops are being sent into Russia to help Russia in their war against Ukraine. These North Korean soldiers have been shipped over to Russia in naval ships and dropped off at the Russian port city of Vladivostok. From here, the North Koreans were shipped to different Russian military bases, where they were equipped with Russian military uniforms and were seen training with Russian troops. Vladimir Putin and Russia are buying these North Korean soldiers at a very cheap rate and are sending them into Russia's Kursk region. In the summer of 2024, Ukrainian counterattacks were very successful, so successful that they made significant gains in Russia's Kursk region. Despite Russian attempts at pushing back Ukrainian forces, Ukraine's military has kept their ground in many parts of Kursk. The estimated number of Russian soldiers killed in this war as of late 2024 is between 100,000 to 600,000, and while this is a very broad range, even 100,000 soldiers lost is an extremely bad look on Putin amongst the Russian citizens. In fear of losing even more Russian soldiers, Putin has been shipping in North Korean soldiers to fight on the front lines of Kursk. As of December 2024, it's estimated that roughly 10,000 North Korean soldiers have been sent into Russia's Kursk region and are actively participating in this war against Ukraine. This is the first time that many of these North Korean soldiers have ever left North Korea and are now being exposed to the relative wealth of Russian cities and even have access to the internet. Although there hasn't been any confirmed escape attempts from the Kursk region, this could become much more of a possibility once these soldiers become aware of their situation.
The continuation of the story provides another compelling look into the lengths to which North Koreans will go to escape the oppressive regime. Choi's escape via the Han River highlights how dangerous the journey by sea can be, with the strong currents and the constant threat of being caught by North Korean patrols. It also underscores the ingenuity and resourcefulness of those desperate enough to attempt such escapes. The detail about Choi building his own wooden canoe is particularly striking, showing how limited resources don't necessarily deter these individuals from finding ways to flee. The mention of a second North Korean who went missing during the same escape attempt serves as a sobering reminder of how high the stakes are in these kinds of endeavors. The stark contrast between the success of one escape and the possible fate of another adds an emotional weight to the story. This also highlights the constant risk involved in trying to escape North Korea, especially when dealing with the military's vigilance. The segue into the 2025 potential escape route through the military is fascinating and unsettling. It paints a grim picture of how North Koreans, in search of freedom, might see joining a foreign military as a viable path to escape. This connection to the Russian-Ukrainian conflict and the use of North Korean soldiers by Russia introduces a new layer of complexity to the situation. It's a chilling thought that soldiers who might have once been isolated from the outside world are now being exposed to the relative freedom of Russia and the internet, possibly triggering new thoughts of defection. The mention of the potential for escape from Russia's Kursk region is both intriguing and troubling. It's a situation that could evolve in the coming years, and it's worth considering how it might change the landscape of North Korean defection. The idea that North Korean soldiers, once isolated from the outside world, are now experiencing foreign cities and access to the internet could be a game-changer. It opens up possibilities for future escapes, but also raises ethical questions about the exploitation of these soldiers in the conflict. This segment of the narrative really emphasizes the constant tension between survival and escape, the creativity of those fleeing, and the ever-changing political landscape that might offer new opportunities or dangers for those looking to leave North Korea. How do you think the international community might respond if North Korean defectors start using foreign military deployments as a means of escape?
Situation. To assist this escape attempt, Ukraine has included the Korean language in their I Want to Live hotline, designed initially to help Russian soldiers that want to surrender. The hotline offers a 24/7 service where soldiers can call to arrange their surrender, which guarantees under international law that they will be treated with care and that their rights will be respected. This hotline has gained significant attention, with over 48 million visits to its website and thousands of calls from Russian troops looking to surrender. Now that the hotline includes the Korean language, Ukraine is hoping that these North Korean soldiers catch wind of the hotline and end up utilizing this service to surrender and escape into Ukraine. In 2025, as more North Koreans continuously get shipped into Russia to fight their war, it's likely a significant number of these soldiers could escape into Ukraine. This isn't the first time North Koreans have been sent into Russia, however. For many years, Russia has been utilizing North Koreans as laborers and essentially slaves to fulfill many of their worst manual labor jobs. Although rare, North Koreans have found success at escaping their oppressive regime while working as a slave in Russia. One famous example of this comes from a man named Zane Han. Zane's escape began in the far western region of Russia, St. Petersburg, where he worked intense 15-hour days, 7 days a week. Zane's main job was pouring concrete and laying bricks at construction sites. Zane and his North Korean colleagues were only given 2 days off every year and were confined to their own specialized North Korean housing, cut off from the Russian public. Zane was still motivated to work in Russia, as this was a rare opportunity to leave the North Korean mainland, and he was able to send his profits back to his family in North Korea. This all changed, however, during the COVID pandemic. In order for the North Korean government to profit more off their overseas laborers, the North Korean regime cut these people's salaries in half. At this point, Zayn went from making $30 a day to now just $10 to $15 a day. Zayn finally had enough. The next day, Zayn was allowed to leave his construction site. On one of his 2 days off the entire year, Zayn purchased a cell phone from an Uzbekistan coworker for $30, roughly 3 days worth of his salary. Once he got a hold of this phone, Zayn called the United Nations Refugee Agency in Moscow. The United Nations then sent out a team to help Zayn first escape to Moscow and then to an undisclosed country. From there, Zayn flew all the way to South Korea, officially becoming one of the 67 North Koreans to escape the regime in 2022. According to a UN report this year, around 100,000 North Koreans currently work outside mainland North Korea, earning money for Kim Jong-un and his regime. The United Nations continuously tries to reach out to these overseas North Korean workers, but most are in tightly controlled areas with limited knowledge of the outside world. Out of these 100,000 North Koreans living abroad, some of these include high-ranking diplomats living in countries North Korea is allies with. One of these diplomats included a man named Lui Reactsz, North Korea's #2 diplomat in Cuba. Despite being high up in North Korea's government, Ri was progressively becoming more and more upset with the regime's decisions.
This portion of the narrative continues to shed light on the multifaceted ways North Koreans attempt to escape their regime, and it introduces another method with the inclusion of the Korean language in Ukraine's I Want to Live hotline. This initiative is a powerful example of how countries, even in times of conflict, can extend humanitarian support to those seeking freedom. The hotline's multilingual expansion, specifically for North Korean soldiers, represents a potential lifeline for those who may be unaware of other escape routes. It is an innovative and significant step, as it bridges the gap between two seemingly unrelated conflicts: the Russian-Ukrainian war and North Korean oppression. The possibility of North Korean soldiers using this hotline to surrender and escape into Ukraine is a thought-provoking development. It raises questions about how this could reshape the dynamics of North Korean defections. With the continuous flow of North Koreans into Russia to fight for the war effort, it seems plausible that many soldiers could become increasingly aware of the opportunity to escape. These soldiers, exposed to the relative freedoms of Russia and the internet, may be more susceptible to recognizing their options and ultimately seeking asylum through Ukraine's initiative. The story of Zayn Han is another poignant and tragic example of the ways North Koreans are exploited abroad, this time as forced laborers in Russia. His decision to escape after his wages were drastically cut speaks volumes about the oppressive control the regime has over its citizens, even when they are far from home. Zayn's escape through the United Nations Refugee Agency is a rare success story, but it also highlights the significant risks these individuals take, often in desperate situations. The fact that there are still around 100,000 North Koreans living abroad, working for the regime's benefit, underlines how widespread and systematic the regime's control is. Many of these workers are likely unaware of the broader world or have limited access to information, making it all the more difficult for them to escape. Zayn's use of a cell phone to contact the United Nations was a pivotal moment, but it required access to resources that many others may not have. The question of how many others like Zayn remain trapped in this system is a sobering one. Ri Reactsz's story adds a layer of intrigue, as it suggests that even those in higher echelons of the North Korean government can grow disillusioned with the regime. His increasing dissatisfaction could potentially serve as a precursor to more high-level defections, which would be a significant development in the broader context of North Korean escapes. Overall, this segment paints a complex picture of the varying levels of oppression North Koreans face, both at home and abroad, and how global actors, whether Ukraine, the United Nations, or other entities, are slowly creating opportunities for these individuals to escape. The narrative raises important questions about the future of these defection efforts, especially in 2025, as the dynamics continue to shift with new international and regional conflicts. It also challenges us to consider the ethical implications of using global conflicts as a potential escape route for oppressed individuals.
For example, Ri wanted to open a North Korean restaurant in Cuba, but this project got shut down by the North Korean higher-ups. Additionally, in 2023, Ri started experiencing serious health issues and requested medical treatment in Mexico. This request was denied, and now Ri was officially at his breaking point. Ri bought an airplane ticket to an undisclosed country and didn't tell his wife and kids until about 6 hours before the flight for fear that this news could somehow spread. According to Ri, my wife first told me not to make such a dreadful joke, so I showed her our plane tickets and she was speechless. Ri told his wife that there is no hope or future for North Korea. While Ri has kept the details of this defection secret to help protect future defectors, it's believed that he used some type of fake identification to fly out of Cuba, considering North Korea closely monitors their citizens' international travel documents. Ri's family followed him to the Havana airport that day, taking a flight to a third country, and then to South Korea in one of the most high-profile and dramatic defections by North Koreans in recent years. North Korea tries very hard to go after any North Koreans who successfully escape the country, especially those who are at a high level and have important intel about the regime. Ri has said that Kim Jong-un would likely be in a very bad mood if he sees Ri talking to the media publicly. Kim Jong-un might even remember Ri personally, considering they met many times in the past. Following this high-level defection, North Korea decided to retaliate. In May of 2024, North Korea started sending balloons into South Korea. These balloons were described by the regime as gifts of sincerity, which carried garbage such as cigarette butts, worn clothes, soil containing parasites, and other general garbage. This retaliation disrupted normal life in South Korea, where teams in hazmat suits had to come inspect and then dispose of this waste being sent into South Korea. Some of these balloons even caused delays and diversions for planes coming out of South Korea's Incheon Airport, a major international hub. South Korea decided to respond by reinstating propaganda broadcasts across the demilitarized zone for the first time in 6 years. Massive loudspeakers were installed near the DMZ, broadcasting news that was critical of the North Korean regime and emphasizing the freedoms that are available if you escape to South Korea. These speakers are so powerful that they can project messages up to 10 kilometers or 6 miles into North Korea. On quiet nights or in favorable conditions, these messages can even extend further, reaching villages and military outposts deep into North Korean land. South Korea hopes that North Korean citizens hearing these messages could potentially create doubt about the regime's propaganda and expose them to a different reality of the world. In 2025, attempting to escape North Korea will result in stricter than ever punishments. Defectors are sent to either political prison camps or labor camps, where the prisoners endure forced labor, starvation, and even death. High-profile defectors or North Korean soldiers that get caught are often executed right on the spot. North Korea also practices guilty by association, where family members of a defector can also experience severe punishments. Even aunts and uncles of a North Korean caught escaping the country can be denied job opportunities or even education. After serving their sentences, defectors and their families are placed under permanent surveillance, making future escape attempts nearly impossible. These extreme punishments are publicized to all North Koreans in order to distill fear and hopefully prevent future defections. With this all in mind, it makes more sense why the North Korean soldiers being
The unfolding story of Ri Il-gyu's defection is both dramatic and revealing. It illustrates the profound desperation that can arise from living under a repressive regime, even for high-ranking officials like Ri. His escape from Cuba, especially after facing health issues and the denial of medical treatment, demonstrates how the systemic oppression North Koreans face eventually pushes even those closest to the regime to their breaking point. His decision to escape in secret for fear that his family could be punished or that his plan could leak is indicative of the constant surveillance and fear instilled by the North Korean government. The emotional weight of his farewell to his family, where he told them that there was no future for North Korea, highlights the immense personal toll these defection stories carry. The fact that Ri used fake identification to escape, despite his high-ranking position, underscores the extreme measures North Koreans must take to elude the regime. The North Korean government's obsession with monitoring their citizens' international travel documents is chilling, revealing the level of control they seek to exert over their people, even beyond their borders. The retaliation from North Korea, including the launching of balloons filled with garbage, reflects the regime's tendency to react aggressively when faced with defection or criticism. The balloons, described as gifts of sincerity, are a disturbingly petty form of retaliation, designed to create disruption and instill fear in South Korea. The fact that these actions caused disruptions in international air traffic and required hazmat teams to deal with the contaminated waste further emphasizes the absurdity and cruelty of the regime's actions. South Korea's response, with the installation of loudspeakers broadcasting critical messages about North Korea's regime, offers a glimmer of hope for the North Korean people. The fact that these broadcasts can reach deep into North Korean territory, potentially exposing citizens to alternate perspectives, is a powerful form of psychological warfare. It's a reminder of the power of information, especially in a country where the government tightly controls all sources of news and ideology. The increasing punishment for defectors in 2025, with the threat of execution and the collective punishment of family members, paints a bleak picture for those trying to escape North Korea. The system of guilty by association is particularly cruel, as it punishes entire families for the actions of one member. This serves to reinforce the idea that any attempt at escape is not just an act of defiance, but an act of betrayal against the state, with devastating consequences. The final point about North Korean soldiers being deployed to Russia is particularly thought-provoking. The idea that these soldiers, isolated from their homeland and exposed to the outside world, might awaken to the possibilities of freedom is an important element of hope in an otherwise grim situation. The leaked videos offering a rare glimpse into the lives of these soldiers provide a glimpse into the human side of the North Korean regime, showing that, even within the tightly controlled environment of Russia, there is still the potential for escape and defection. In all, this passage serves as a stark reminder of the oppressive nature of the North Korean regime, the lengths to which individuals must go to escape, and the global ripple effects that these defections create. While the situation is dire, there are moments of resistance and hope that continue to emerge, whether through defections like Reactsz or through the quiet efforts of countries like South Korea and Ukraine to offer a pathway to freedom.